the common theme is they've been problems I've experienced myself and that I wanted to solve for myself. And as a result of that, my career has very much been a map. I've jumped from category to category. But the neat thing is this common thread of consumer go to market means I've gotten a lot better at figuring out how to drive growth, how to create reach, distribution, and just thinking in that sort of way, which is very different to a traditional, more
Welcome to the Feria TechCast. We'll bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. Today we are joined by Raj Singh, a VP of Product at Mozilla, where he leads new 0 to 1 product initiatives, and a serial entrepreneur with a remarkable track record of building and exiting customer tech startups. With a background in computer engineering and multiple successful acquisitions under his belt, including Tempo AI, acquired by Salesforce, and Pulse, acquired by Mozilla. Raj brings deep real-world expertise in AI, product management, and startup growth. He is a hands-on leader who has navigated everything from AI meeting summarization to building the largest recipe community on Android. And he actively shares his insights on AI product strategy and venture capital. Raj, welcome to the show.
thank you, Ezekiel. Looking forward to it.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Your career is quite a case study in successful entrepreneurship. So, you founded multiple startups, achieved several acquisitions, and now lead product initiatives at Mozilla. So, I'd like to ask, what's the common thread in how you identify a truly promising product idea versus just an interesting technology?
You know, normal product management, like textbook, would tell you that you should um, do customer interviews, understand their problem, you know, make sure you deeply understand their problem, do journey maps, whatever it might be. Possibly even propose a solution at some point. So you start solutioning, get feedback, iterate, tons of little S curves. And, the funny thing is, I've never been in that camp. I've been in the camp that I want to solve the problem for myself. So I look at things that bother me. Now, the counter argument is, hey, Raj, you're building for yourself. You are a user of one. Are there really like, a million other people that might be experiencing this problem, or a billion, or whatever that number is? And I kind of bet on my own intuition that I'll figure it out. So I'm sort of the opinion that if I can build something for myself, I'll find 10 other people, and maybe I'll find 100. Maybe I won't find 1,000. Maybe it does have an artificial ceiling. Maybe I won't find 10,000. But I'm banking that my own product intuition and product sensibility will get me there. So if you're looking at my career arc and various startups that I've had since basically masters, when I started my first company in 2000, the common theme is they've been problems I've experienced myself and that I wanted to solve for myself. And as a result of that, my career has very much been a map. I have jumped from category to category, file sharing, music, to ringtones, to college dating, recipes, live video, calendaring, meeting summarization, browsers. It's all over the map. But the neat thing is this common thread of consumer go to market means I've gotten a lot better at figuring out how to drive growth, how to create reach, distribution, just thinking in that sort of way, which is very different to a traditional, more SaaS sort of a playbook.
Fantastic. So let's talk about your journey with Pulse, the AI meeting summarization startup acquired by Mozilla. So what was the initial insight or frustration that you faced, which sparked that idea, and how did you validate it was a real problem worth solving? Like you said earlier, the startups, the products you actually make, like to solve the problems you were facing.
Yeah, so absolutely. Yeah. So I had, my previous startup was in the calendar space, and we built an app that helped you prepare for meetings. It was called Tempo, that Salesforce had acquired. And by preparing for meetings, it would give you information about the people you're going to meet, where you're going to meet. It would pull in contextual data like emails that might be relevant, or documents that might be relevant to your upcoming meeting. And when we were building Tempo, we used to think of meetings from a life cycle perspective. So there's kind of like 2 weeks before you meet, maybe, something gets put on the calendar. Then there might be the night before or the Sunday before because you're kind of looking at your week ahead. There might be the morning of. It's like, oh, what does my day look like? There might be the minutes or 15 minutes before the meeting, right? Then there's the meeting itself. Then there might be a few minutes after the meeting, you're taking some quick notes or whatever it might be. There might be some end of the day. There might be another follow up a few days later. The meeting actually has a continuum. There's like little steps that you take in each of these parts of the journey. With Tempo, we were assisting before the meeting and after the meeting. And so I already had this sort of like starting point where I was thinking about how can I help you during the meeting? And one of the things I remember at Tempo, we had a lot of like large group meetings, like particularly when we'd go out and meet customers. This is before sort of Zoom era, but there would be like just 10 people in the room, right? A lot of meetings. A lot of people in these meetings. And you always had a dedicated note taker. And we were thinking, like, hey, what if there's a way we could just automate that? Now, the funny thing is, at the time, this was like an uncertain behavior, right? And a lot of consumer is trying to figure out where the puck is going. I call it swimming downstream because people were like, oh, is this privacy? Why is there this other thing in my call? Whatever it might be, right? But fast forward to today, what Zoom meeting are you on that isn't recorded, right? Like, almost everything is now recorded, right? But you can imagine just literally 4 or 5 years ago, it was sort of a question, but it's amazing how things have moved past. So, anyway, so we built this first sort of version that effectively during your call would basically capture meeting notes. And it wasn't very good, right? LMs have made things a lot better. But we had to actually go and take a bunch of meeting data. So we had purchased 4,000 hours of annotated workplace sort of meetings, not annotated, but meeting transcripts. And then we crawled YouTube because it turns out there's a whole bunch of companies that adopt this radical transparency kind of model, and they actually publish their meetings. And so we would look at these meetings, and then we would run them through an annotation pipeline. So we had a data labeling team that was actually based in India. Then we were annotating based on a series of different heuristics. Is this an action item? Is this a follow up? What is this a question? Whatever. And then we would score it, train a language model, not a large language model. That was a fine tuning on top of the BERT language model from Google, and then we'd continue to improve. And through that journey, we had built something that was useful. And Mozilla runs the Firefox browser, and they have a product called Pocket, and they want to do article summarization. And so we had a team that really knew how to, basically annotate and summarize content or build a model to do so. And so they ended up acquiring the company, and that's how I landed at Mozilla.
Amazing. So, for the engineers and developers in our audience, what does the 0 to 1 product process actually look like inside a major organization like Mozilla? And how is it different from building in a startup?
Yeah, I've been asked this question before. This is it's a long answer. Building, it doesn't matter what you're building, you're always going through some form of a 0 to 1. But certainly when a product is more mature, you can lean on things like data, quantitative. You can effectively run or hundreds or thousands of A/B tests because you have scale. You can isolate 1% of your audience. When you're building at the beginning, you really don't know much, right? So you're banking on your own conviction, your own hypotheses. There is no data. You don't have consensus. That can feel very difficult if you're somebody who's always operated in a state of a lot of data and decisions sort of almost being made for you or having someone to blame versus your own sort of thought or opinion on what this should be or should not be. And so, there is a big difference. And, I like to think of them as archetypes. You have visionary craftspersons and you have operators. It's kind of two different buckets. Now, when you're building 0 to 1 as a startup, the world is your canvas, right? But you have literally nothing. I mean, you have to build your own distribution, you have to build your own acquisition, you have legal, you have all these different things, but you're kind of just plowing through. And you're always playing on gray areas because when you're talking about consumer, there is literally no consumer product that has grown without playing on the edge. So you're always playing on surfaces that may be uncomfortable, right? I'm not saying like things like necessarily email spam or social media, TikTok, programmatic TikTok, or whatever kind of or just spamming the Facebook wall. But there's tactics and tricks you're playing on because you're trying to drive growth. When you're a larger company, you have a lot of constraints. You have brand reputation, you have legal. You want to play within the boundaries and the guidelines that you're allowed to, and so that really very much changes the game when you think about building 0 to 1 in a bigger company versus as a startup. The other thing is when you're in a larger company, you often already have an existing audience. Maybe you have an existing product with tons of users. And so you want to sell to that audience. So you're thinking from the perspective of building adjacencies versus not necessarily net new audience. I'd say the other area that I've seen, just in terms of core differences, is it's much harder to maintain that conviction in a larger company. There's a lot of shiny objects. Different things will come across. Different people have different opinions, and there's this constant fear of failure. But when you're a startup, like everything's on the line. But if you've had mostly a ladder career, you don't really fail. You always have something you can blame and deflect. Like, oh, it didn't work because of this, but we can, we made the decision in consensus, right? But when you're building something from scratch, you're not able to do that. Like you kind of own it, and so I think I mean, this is just a super high level, but there's a lot of differences in building between the two.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, you've written about AI and product management. So, in your view, what is the biggest mistake technical founders make when trying to integrate AI into a product?
I think one, you said technical founders, and I think one of the issues is overestimating how good the AI can be and designing a user experience that assumes the AI is perfect. So I actually call this the 95% rule. Basically, assume that AI is going to be wrong 5% of the time, right? And it may not be 5%, it may be 2%. It depends on the domain or the type of question or whatever you're asking. But it is wrong some percentage of the time. Is the workflow you're trying to solve, is it okay to be wrong 1 or 2% of the time? If it's not, then you really need to think about a user experience that can handle and manage that. I'll give you a good example. If you're building a self-driving car, you can't be wrong 1 2% of the time. If you're building an autopilot airplane, you can't be wrong 1 2% of the time. It has to be correct all the time. But if you're building something that's suggesting content for an article or a website, like what we're building with Solo at Mozilla, it's okay if you're wrong 3 4 5% because you can go and edit it further and make it perfect, right? It's not mission critical. And so you're seeing a lot of startups that had raised money just after ChatGPT was released, where they're backtracking a little bit because they had sort of pitched a concept that we're going to replace this workflow and fully automate it. And now they're realizing the last 2 3% of the last mile has become very difficult. It doesn't matter how much fine tuning or whatever they're doing. And so now they're like going, oh, we may have to bring a human back in the loop, or we may have to like change the UX to accommodate the fact that there is this sort of 2 3 4 5% error rate. And so then all of a sudden the ROI calculation is changing, and now the positioning of the product has changed, right? But I think that is a very common sort of AI meet PM mistake, and I would imagine a lot of PMs, especially lesser technical PMs, you really need to understand what the AI can do, because it really does impact and influence how you design. And I very much think of it like designing AI interfaces is a lot different to just sort of designing interfaces that are deterministic.
Great. So, from your experience, what separates a PM who consistently makes great decisions from those who don't? Is it a skill, a process, or something else?
I have two different perspectives on this. So I like to think of functional roles in an organization as a set of skills. So think of a game character in a video game. You can like work on their stamina, you can work on their strength, their agility, their speed. They always have all these different attributes. You can go and level it up, right? The same thing is true in work, right? You think of like product managers. They should be good communicators. They should have good analytical sense. They should have good product sense, design sense, right? They should have storytelling, right? There's all these competencies. You could probably break it down to 30, 40 different things that can make a great PM. The interesting thing is those competencies and what's most critical may vary depending on stage of product. You're dealing with a 0 to 1 product. It's quite different to a product that's going to version 10 or version 11, where you may need to drive consensus across large groups of people and have a lot of dependencies on the organization versus when you're early on and you're kind of freewheeling and you can almost do whatever you want, right? So, you know, part of me says, hey, focus on those competencies. You can get better. You can improve your analytical sense. You can improve your design sense. You can improve your understanding of pricing and things like that. Right. And if you do that, a lot of that is not necessarily learning how to do analytics, it's reframing your thinking. Right. I like to think of data. I like to think of all the things you learn as not decisions that go directly into your product. You see a piece of customer feedback. You don't translate that and say, okay, here's the feature request. No, that informs your own model. There's an LLM inside of us, right? And now we're thinking about that and then using our own product intuition, our own sensibility to then determine what really it should translate into, if anything, right? And so I do feel on one hand, you can level up these skills. On the other hand, there are PMs that consistently make better decisions or consistently have better outcomes. And I don't know the answer to that question because I don't think there's been enough data to sort of evaluate, like if you took a large swath of PMs that have gone through training, gone through upskilling, have tried to improve, have made focus efforts, do they end up with better outcomes? And I would argue there's so much chaos theory in all of this where you just can't control, XYZ variable to the infinity, that it's very hard to sort of say, follow this exact playbook and you'll have success. And I call out the fact that as I've grown my many startups, what worked yesterday never worked again. I almost had to do it entirely again and new every single time. Right. And so I don't have a good answer for that question, but I will say there is some level of intuition, taste, sensibility, and there are people who simply just make better decisions on a more consistent basis. And if you think about the role of a PM or the greatest PMs, is to be one of those people, to be one of those people who makes more decisions than wrong decisions, more correct decisions than wrong decisions.
Wonderful. That's quite an interesting response you gave there. So you have successfully navigated multiple acquisitions. From your experience so far, what's one thing you think some founders often get wrong when preparing when preparing their company for an acquisition?
So, there's an idiom that people always talk to. It's better to be bought than sold, right? And so I don't think one should plan to get acquired, right? Like that's not the way to play this game. You should plan to build something useful and see where it goes. I'm a big believer in this old Naval Ravikant quote that if you want to build your network, build the great things and people will come and find you, right? So the fastest way to grow your network is just build a great product. That being said, when I think of products and companies, I like to go through some exercise in the beginning where I think about like, okay, in the downside scenario, I go down 2-3 years and this doesn't play out the way I want it to play out. Who are the likely buyers? Right. And I try to identify the top 5 or 10 who I think are the most likely buyers. And from the onset of building my startup, because I never planned for acquisition, but it's nice to have optionality. I go and try to build relationships in those companies. Why? Because it takes 6 to 12 months to even figure out who is the person who could execute that purchase, right? And you're not going out trying to pitch your company. You're just trying to go and build a relationship. And the way you're doing that is you're reaching out and you're sharing what you're doing. So in some ways, you're revealing to your direct competitors exactly what you're doing, but they can't react in the same way because large companies move slow and they have a lot of structural reasons they just simply can't execute at the same speed. Right. And so then what happens is if you hit this sort of downside situation where you need to find a buyer, now you have 5 or 10 people you can tap and you can ask, say, hey, here's the situation. Is this something of interest? Now, if it doesn't play out, it doesn't play out. But that's the sort of downside scenario. The ideal situation is you want to be bought. You don't want to be sold. And the reason is there's a lot of misconception on how larger companies buy companies. People think like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. So and so should buy this company. But the reality is people buy based on most immediate need. So your product might be super synergistic, but it's not a priority right now. And the way it often works is in a large corporation, the executive team will have an offsite and they'll have some discussion and they leave that offsite on a quarterly or, biannual basis or whatnot, semi-annual basis. And they'll be like, we need to enter this space and we need to enter it now, right? They suddenly realize they're behind on something. And then they instruct corporate development to go find companies that they know in that space. And so your goal by meeting these leaders, on some periodic basis, these sort of top 5 or top 10, is just simply to be top of mind. Because a win is to be one of the companies listed in that list that they ping when something like that emerges. Because if you're not even in the list, then you never even had the opportunity, right? So that's the way to really think about it.
So that's a really insightful response you gave there. So I'd like to ask, how do you see the role of a product leader evolving as AI becomes more integrated into the development process itself?
When you think about product leadership, I think there's 2 buckets. On one hand, your job is to upskill your team. Your job is to make your team better, right? You want superstars. You want people to be able to execute and move faster, right? And Gen AI is doing all of this. In some ways, Gen AI is raising everyone's bar. It's democratizing fractional expertise, right? And so forth. Another part of a product leadership, you're dealing with, people, right? And the politics around that. So you want to be an unblocker, or, once I heard it described as an expensive router, right? You're there to make sure like the guardrails come down or removed where different things might be creating friction. But I think within all of that, one of the things that has been unfortunate is a lot of product leaders have lost a lot of their craftsmanship, right? They're not writing product docs anymore. They're not necessarily doing design. They're not reviewing things. They're not actually going through the motions, right? And I think in this era with Gen AI, everyone needs to become what I call a super IC or a super individual contributor. And so basically, product leaders today are having to adapt because they need to be as hands-on as anyone else. They need to be able to build, right? They need to be able to work alongside the code, right? Now we have Gen AI, all of this is sort of enabling it. And the reason for that is the next generation PM with Gen AI, it's much more about archetype and agency and taste, and less so about specific years of experience or domain expertise or competency, because Gen AI is now the equalizer. It sort of raised everyone's bar. And so I think a lot of this stuff is coming into practice now. We're seeing interview practices change, hearing companies like Shopify literally making building and prototyping as part of the interview process in a live sort of format. So, you know, I think, it's a big change, and from the perspective that in a lot of occupations, things don't change a lot. Tech has always changed a lot, but this one's massive. This is disruptive and it's uncomfortable, but people do need to spend the time and figure out how they can use Gen AI to accelerate, change their workflows, and move faster. Because I'm not in the bucket that AI will replace people, but I am definitely in the bucket that people who are using AI to move faster and make better decisions will certainly replace those that are not.
Fantastic. So, looking at the current Gen AI landscape, what's an underhyped or overlooked application that you believe has massive potential?
Oh man, you put me on the spot. There's so many Gen AI tools that I use, so I'm not going to answer this directly. I think about, when it comes to growth, we do a lot of vibe coding internally. So we build little internal tools, things to operate like a programmatic blog, things to operate programmatic TikTok, things to speed up the work that's involved in doing analytics and so forth. My opinion here is you don't need to jump from tool to tool, and you certainly don't need to jump from model to model. For most people, there is a equalization happening now where only in specific use cases might be outperforming. Maybe if you're a developer, fine, or in specific, vertical sort of workflows. But for the most part, you're going to get a pretty similar experience between ChatGPT and Gemini and others, right? So to me, I think the question is find a set of tools that you're comfortable with and go all in. I often suggest people to document what they do in their day and then ask the question to ChatGPT, how could I use AI more to have accelerated my day, right? And so, and feed that list of things that you've done. In terms of specific tools, I'm always playing with a lot of tools. I'm not going to call out anything as sort of like, oh, this is the newest cool tool that I like. I'm playing with Byword right now, which is around programmatic blogging. I'm playing with Real Farm, which is around TikTok and video generation. But there's just so much stuff, right, out there. It's just there's almost a new role forming in companies, which is kind of like vibe operations, where they're literally just playing with tools and figuring it out. But I like to crowdsource. I like to ask my peers what they're using and playing with because different people love to play with new stuff. And this is where a lot of the knowledge learning is happening.
Great. So, based on your experience at Skyfire, Temple AI, and Pulse, so what's the most valuable lesson you learned from a product that didn't work as expected?
When you're building early stage product, you don't have the privilege of A/B testing, right? That's a very privileged position. A lot of data, a lot of resources, time, money. You don't have time, right? You're often bootstrapped or you're funded for 18-month run, sort of growth levels are expected, whatever it is, right? And so you're making a lot of guesses, right? Educated guesses. Like, will this work? Will this not work? And you don't know, right? So you look at a lot of comps, but you still make lots of mistakes along the way, and some of the fallacies I've looked at in the past where I fell into traps of sunk cost. I built something thinking it would work, it didn't work, but then I'm maintaining the feature instead of cutting the feature. And you do want to cut the feature because maintaining a feature could be impacting your overall experience. It could be adversely, there's a maintenance cost from an engineering and design perspective, right? People don't think about feature maintenance. They always think about just new feature development, right? There's been instances where I've gotten so enamored with the technology that I forgot what the job to be done is. Like, what are we actually trying to solve? Like, what is the actual problem? Because when you take a step back and ask the question, what are you actually trying to solve? It may turn out there's a much simpler solution that doesn't require half as much engineering and tech, right? But we fall in love with the tech and then we start thinking about, oh, how can we make this tech better and that? And we forget, like, well, what are we actually trying to do here, right? And so the funny thing with these sort of decisions is I make the mistakes over and over again. I'm a little bit better over the years. I've reframed my thinking and how I approach things, but you'll make these mistakes again. And again, right, and you'll look back, you're like, oh, I should have made a harder decision then, or I should have, whatnot. But at the same time, you also have to get a little bit lucky, right? There's a reason 86% of venture-backed companies don't return the money in, and there's a lot of smart people involved here. And the reason is timing can greatly impact things. Wrong positioning, right? You might have the best team in the world, but a couple things also have to fall your way too.
Well, that was packed with insights. So, for the aspiring founders in our audience, what's the one skill beyond technical ability that is most critical for success?
In my opinion, if you took all the product management skills, in the end, I think it's something within the realm of communication. And the reason is so much of product management is telling a story. You have a problem, you need to explain your story. Like why is this a problem? Like what is it like in the day in the life of this person today? How are you trying to improve this? And being able to tell that story in a persuasive way, in a concise way, in a succinct way, such that people can grok it, understand the empathy around it, feel the pain, see your solution, and see the delight. It's a remarkable talent, and there's people who are better at it, and there's people who are, who work towards it. But it's something often people don't think about. They think about product management or engineering, and think about, oh, I need to go build, I need to go learn how to become a better JavaScript developer, like whatever. Right? No, I mean that's all great, but communication, I think, is if I was to distill everything just to one, that would certainly be at the top of my list.
Great. So, Raj, where do you see the biggest opportunity for innovation in the next 2 to 3 years that most people aren't really talking about yet?
I don't know if people aren't talking about it yet, but at least within the Gen AI era, and there's innovation everywhere, right? So I'm not. There's a lot of fascinating things happening in core sciences, physical sciences, energy, and things like that. And I don't. I'm not going to pretend I understand any of those things to even comment in those categories. But when you're talking about Gen AI, I think we're now in. I call it Gen Beta, right? Gen Alpha was sort of the post iPhone era. Gen Beta, I think, are the kids that were born after ChatGPT. These kids have grown up in an environment where there's something they can just ask, and it knows the answer, which is very amazing, right? And so I think what you're seeing is, and for a long while, chat was always a painful modality, right? Like you would enter a website web experience, you don't want to chat because it didn't work well and it wasn't precise and it would barf and it would get things wrong. And so people built experiences with menus and you would click and navigate through menus. But now we're seeing chat work really well to the point where people can pursue and go down paths that are hyper customized to what they need and what they want and their questions and their answers and whatever. And so I call this modality vibe, right? That's the kind of industry term, but the vibe modality. And I think what you're going to see over the next 2, 3 years, and it's already happening, every creative application, whether you're creating code, creating a design, creating physical hardware, creating an architectural diagram, creating a landscape, creating anything is going to have a vibe interface where you can chat to create. And I think this is just an amazing unlock because this is really tapping all this creative energy that so many people have, things that they wanted to build, but they didn't know how to get to those fractional experts to actually build it. And they can now build it and they can build it in a way that they understand, where they can describe what they want and they can iterate through just language as opposed to having to click through menus and navigate super complicated UIs. I mean, even using Figma, as simple as some way to describe it, is actually quite complicated now, right? It's a very, very sort of heavy lift. But imagine you had an experience like that where it's all completely chat driven, right? It's all vibe. So the next 2, 3 years, I think you're seeing the vibe modality go beyond just horizontal applications, but super vertical applications, designing medicine design, uh, you know, uh, everything in biology, et cetera, right? So that's what I think is an interesting area to watch.
Great. So, your career has been about innovating at the intersection of technology and human needs. So in the context of product development and startup, I'd like to ask, what does innovation truly mean to you?
People ask like, "Hey, Roger, what are you motivated by?" And I said, I've never been financially motivated. As ironic as that sounds, I've taken a lot of big swings and risks, and you certainly wouldn't be doing that if you were thinking about just sort of compounding wealth. I've always been motivated by happy users. There's something about getting millions of happy users saying they love your product. It's very fulfilling to me. It's like I'm solving a real pain point. I'm enabling something for someone. I'm creating delight. To me, that's innovation. To me, that's achieving an outcome where you have happy users, you've innovated on some problem, some pain point, some design system, whatever it might be, where you've created a bunch of happy users, where the world is sort of your judge, and they love what you built. And I think that is a form of innovation. Whether you want to describe it as a hard technology innovation or a product innovation doesn't matter. I think that's the outcome that we want to achieve.
Amazing, amazing. That's truly inspiring, I would say. So finally, for our listeners who want to learn from your experiences and follow your work, so where's the best place for them to find you online or read your thoughts on AI and product management?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm on Twitter or X at Mobile Raj, also on Threads at Mobile Raj. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I do write longer form pieces there. And then I do want to shout out, since I do work at Mozilla on new products. One of the products I manage called Solo. It's an AI website builder at soloist.ai. So definitely check that out if you're building a small business. But yeah, I'm generally available. My email is public. People can mention me or DM me, however they want to reach.
Right, Raj, it's been a really insightful conversation with you, and I am excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Ezekiel. Enjoyed the conversation.